For years now, the message to women over 50 and younger women with an increased risk of breast cancer has been to get regular mammograms. Such advice is now seriously being called into question amid concerns that screening might be doing more harm than good. Veteran journalist and producer Renée Pellerin's new book makes that case. It's called Conspiracy of Hope: The Truth About Breast Cancer Screening, and she joins us now for more. Renée, this is you've written a very important book here, and it's a very disturbing book, and I want to start right at the beginning with the introduction, where you say that nothing in medicine has ever generated as much controversy or conflict as mammography screening. Why so?
Well, you know, screening was first begun in the United States in the 1970s, and so that's more than 50 years that we have been arguing about it.
Yeah.
It's been a huge debate, and it's been a huge fight for 50 years. And many people have told me that in medicine, when they have medical students, they say that there's nothing that people argue more about than mammogram screening.
And you say it because it has as much to do with emotion as science and fact, which is unusual, because usually medicine's all about what's empirically provable. Why the emotion in this case?
It should be, but I think in this case, there are people who sincerely believed in early detection, that early detection worked. They've invested their entire lives in that idea, and even though there's quite a bit of evidence that it doesn't work nearly as well, if it works at all, as we think it does, it's hard to let go of that belief. So the scientific arguments are colored with this kind of anger and emotion that those who would argue against screening are murdering women and they're causing great harm, when in fact it's just a basic science and evidence.
Well, you tell the story in the book about and you're going to help me with his name. Trax, is that his name?
Philip Strax.
Strax.
Yes.
Philip Strax, who was a doctor whose wife died of breast cancer, and that's what got him interested in finding a cure. And I mean, his bona fides couldn't be more pure in that regard, right?
Exactly. And from all accounts, he was a very sincere man who truly cared about women, and he did not want other women to go through what his wife had gone through. But he was involved in research, the very first study in the United States. And those researchers, in my view, took a pretty moderate tone with screening. They really wanted to find out whether it would work or not. It's kind of since then, really, that the emotional baggage came along with the idea of early detection and screening.
Okay, let's focus on the science then for a second here. Why would mammography screening be trickier than other kinds of cancer screening?
Well, okay, for starters, mammography is looking at the tissue of the breast, right? And X-rays came along way before people started to figure out how they could picture breast. You could picture bones quite easily, but soft tissue is very, very difficult. And then the breast has fatty tissue and fibrous tissue and so on. And so finding something that looks like a tumor in all of that requires a particular skill on the part of the radiologists. Mammograms miss cancers sometimes. They don't see all cancers. So it's never been a perfect test. It is an imperfect test with false negatives, false positives, and sometimes just misses.
We can go back more than 40 years here. National Cancer Institute, they set up 4 committees, all of which reported that there was no evidence that screening women under 50 saved lives, and yet breast cancer detection screenings flourished. How come?
Well, the evidence at that time in the 1970s was the study that Philip Strax did, and it looked pretty promising. They thought that the screening was saving lives, but in that particular study, it was not apparent in women under 50. And then it was quite clear that more research was needed to answer some of the questions. However, along comes 1971 and President Nixon's war on cancer, and there was then a lot of money for cancer research. The American Cancer Society had had success with programs to get women into cervical screening with pap smears, and so this was kind of their next big idea. So with the possibility of research money, they went to the National Cancer Institute and said, let's do what they called a demonstration project. Let's prove that we can get women to come and get mammograms. And that was a five-year program to get 250,000 women into free screening. And hence
the momentum
the
builds.
momentum
Now, that's in the States. How about in Canada? Have we done any like world-class screening, mammography screening studies here?
Yes, I'd say we probably have the best screening study was done in Canada, the Canadian National Breast Screening Study.
When was that?
It started in 1980. They screened women for 5 screens over 4 years, annual screening, studied women distinctly under the age of 50, try to answer some of the questions that previous research couldn't answer.
And what conclusions did they come to?
They've also concluded that there was absolutely no lives saved in women under 40 or for women over 50.
No lives saved by having mammograms.
That's correct.
What kind of reception did that outcome get?
Well, you can imagine. By this time, of course, mammography had already become an industry. The radiology community was promoting strongly. The American Cancer Society was promoting strongly. In Canada, we were trying to get screening programs up. So by the time the Canadian research was actually published, at first in 1992, we already had a screening program in British Columbia and in Ontario. So you can imagine, with all of these people sort of vested in the idea of early detection, and along comes this massive study in Canada of 90,000 women that says, wait a minute, it's actually not saving lives according to the data we have at this point. And then, of course, the Canadian study followed up, and it continued to find the same result, that it doesn't matter how long they looked at it. They followed women for 25 years, and it was the same result, that it just did not have impact on mortality. And it was considered heretical to say that. The radiologists and those and the scientists who truly believed in early detection said, wait a minute, they got the wrong answer. There must have been something wrong with the study.
And was there?
No, there wasn't, although no study is perfect. But there were accusations that there was a screw up in the randomization, purposely putting women in one group as opposed to another to get a different result. And the accusations were so strong that there had to be a forensic audit. And when that was done, involving distinguished scientists looking at the data and involving an accounting firm, a forensic accounting firm, to also help look at the data, they were completely exonerated, and found that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the study.
I want to be careful about how I ask this next question, because I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush. However, I think it's fair to say doctors, researchers, clinicians, the people who are involved in this world, they're very bright people, and they have a lot of education. And relative to most people in society, they're well paid. And they got egos. How much of that do you think's going on here?
I don't know if it's ego or if it's, when you vested your life in something, and your entire community is in the same box as you, there's an element of, it's not an ego or even arrogance. I think there's an element of
tunnel vision?
Tunnel vision, groupthink, I think, can come into play. And it's very hard for somebody who wants to be a critical thinker in that environment to question. And I don't think it's not just radiologists. I think we see that in different areas in the medical profession where it's very difficult to challenge something which is, becomes part of the status quo.
One of the side effects of having so many women getting mammographies, regardless of what age they are, is, as you have pointed out, a lot of false positives, a lot of overdiagnoses, a lot of negative side effects that are not part of the plan. How big a problem is that?
Well, I think it's a huge problem, and I think we're beginning to learn much more about the harms of screening. If you know, false positives is one thing, where it's where you have a screen and it looks like something, and you go back and they look again, and it may even result in a biopsy, and
maybe nothing.
and nothing there. And
how often does that happen?
Well, that can happen. I've heard different estimates, but you know, women who are screened over 10 years, I've heard estimates that it can happen to 50% of women who are repeatedly screened, because every time you get screened, that the chance of that occurs. Now, I think we know that, and I think that's a harm that I think most women are fairly comfortable with. I think they know that can happen. But let's talk about overdiagnosis, because that is not the same thing. Overdiagnosis is when you've been diagnosed with a cancer, but that cancer, if you hadn't seen it on a mammogram, you would never have felt it. It would never have grown. It may have never caused you any problems, any health problems. You've never known that you had it. However, once it's seen on a mammogram, you're subjected to the surgery and the treatment that goes along with it, and possibly unnecessarily. Now, we don't know how often that happens. The estimates vary from it doesn't happen at all to it happens 50% of the time. I think, generally speaking, in looking at different screening programs, that rate of overdiagnosis happens around 30% in 30% of all mammography detected cancers.
Let me tackle another angle here, which is every time a woman goes for a mammography, she does get a little shot of radiation, right? So that they can get the scan.
Yes.
Do we know how harmful that is?
Well, I don't think that there's a huge concern over that level of radiation. In the very beginning, one of the issues with mammography was that it did deliver a significant dose of radiation, and people were freaking out about that and said, no, we shouldn't do this. So there were many, many efforts to decrease the amount of radiation with each mammography screen. No one, as far as I can tell, will say that it's perfectly safe. But I also have not encountered anybody who would say that there's a huge concern over it. There is a concern, and you know, with radiation, it's repeated doses of radiation, and if you have all kinds of other doses of radiation through other tests, you may want to take that into consideration.
Right.
But I wouldn't like to overblow it, that's a major concern.
I want to ask this next question carefully as well, because I'm not making any allegations here, but I did read in your book where you point out that there is a significant financial incentive, you know, regardless of what corner you turn in the healthcare system, for screening to take place. What do we do about that?
By incentive, I talk about that in a couple of different ways in the book. One is that it is an industry. So you have radiologists, you have the people who make the equipment, the radiology equipment, the mammography equipment. You have cancer charities which benefit from the message of fear that goes along with promoting mammography.
A lot of people have a stake in this, a
A
financial
lot of people
stake.
have a stake. And I started out when I was researching thinking that this had to be the driver. And I changed my mind about that I think the driver was largely emotion and just plain hope that we wanted something to work against this dreadful disease. But where we have a financial incentive, which I think is highly questionable, is right here in Ontario, not in other provinces, but here in Ontario, family physicians have a bonus incentive when a certain number of their patients, a proportion of their patients, comply with the invitations that we get to screening. So it's not a case of doctors referring women to screening. It's the women's compliance is measured. So in every family practice, the number of eligible women who go for screening are tallied, and the doctor gets the feedback. And a family physician can earn around $2,000 extra a year, depending on if a significant number of women go for screening, which is a very, you can see right away that sets up a conflict.
Well, is it possible to design a system that takes the financial incentive out of it?
Well, there's no reason to incentivize family physicians to be promoting women to go for this kind of screening. Because you can imagine what happens in a doctor's office when a woman wants to have a conversation about harms and risks, and yet there is the message from the Ontario government that this is a really good thing to do, even though it's not a huge financial incentive. The message is there that we want you to do this.
Well,
right?
you asked the question in your book then, if not mammograms, what? So if not mammograms, what?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't think that there's a clear answer to that just yet. There are people who are researching other markers, a blood test possibly looking for a sign. People trying to find out, can we identify who is more at risk than others, and maybe not screen those women as often? Can we hold on the surgery in some cases and maybe not put women through treatment, maybe watch and wait for some time and before we subject. So there's all kinds of ideas trying to out there in the research among people who are trying to resolve this issue of overdiagnosis and harm that's being done.
Let's come full circle here. I want to return to the introduction, because you ask 4 good questions in the introduction, and I want to put them to you right now, and let's do a bit of a lightning round, okay? 4 quick questions, 4 quick answers. Number 1, does screening really save lives?
Saves very few lives, if any. And importantly, even in the randomized trials where it showed that it could possibly save lives, overall mortality did not change. So there's a difference between breast cancer mortality and overall mortality, and that's the bottom line. Is you want to improve overall the statistics on overall mortality.
The money is phenomenal here, right? I think I remember you saying $8 billion in the U.S. spent on this
Annually, about
Annually.
$8 billion annually, yeah, and and 90 million pounds in England, and British Columbia, $20 million a year.
Tens of millions here as well.
Tens of millions here in Ontario.
What are the benefits? What are the harms?
The benefits are that it may save a few lives. I say may because I think the research has shown that that's a very moderate benefit. It doesn't happen as much as we would like it to happen. And the harms are overdiagnosis, overtreatment, but anxiety, the psychological anxiety, the mammography that fails and results in a false negative, which means false reassurance. That's also a significant harm. So my point is, I think women have to know, and we're not given this information when we're asked to go for screening. We're just told it saves our lives. We're made to feel that we're ridiculous if we don't comply with this invitation. When in fact, I think it should be a decision, a personal decision based on good information, truthful information about both the harms and the risks.
And lastly, having looked at this whole thing, at what age do you think people ought to start having their first mammography?
Well, other than a couple of provinces in Canada, and other than radiological organizations here in Canada and the United States, no one really recommends mammography screening should start until the age of 50 for people who are at normal risk. England, Europe, most public screening programs only invite women starting at age 50. But, you know, women here are sent at age 40 because doctors think it's a good idea, right?
Well, there's a doctor who you quote on the front of your book, Brian Goldman, who's, been all over the place, including on this program, who says this book is a devastating critique of the folly of breast cancer screening. It's called Conspiracy of Hope, The Truth About Breast Cancer Screening, and it's brought Renée Pellerin to our studio. Thanks a lot, Renée.
Oh, thank you for having me. My pleasure.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.